In this video, we're going to take a really quick, hopefully really quick look at how to use the equation editor in Microsoft Word. Now, I will preface this with saying that there are different versions out there, Office 365, Microsoft 2019, etc., and I'm sure there'll be another one before too long. They all function pretty much the same. You may just have to look a little bit further for where to find the actual icons. So without further ado, let's jump into our equation editor. I've already set it up just to kind of remind myself what all I wanted to show you in here, but it's fairly quick. So to start with the equation editor, I'm going to go up to the top left here on the ribbon and choose Insert. And I do apologize, I can't make the ribbon any bigger than it is really. I can change the font size down here, which it did, but I can't make it this much bigger. Choose Insert, and then over here on the right, you'll see, for those of you who know what that capital or that symbol is, it's a capital letter pi. Not to be, sorry, and then there's one over here that's a capital letter omega. This one here, we're going to just click the down arrow for a second, and I'm going to show you that there are already some ready-made equations that you can plug in, some relatively common ones, and then others that are, you have no reason why you would ever know this. But the first one, the area of a circle, fairly common, Pythagorean theorem down here, and the quadratic formula, which is actually a fairly regular one that you might use. You can go online and get a whole bunch of different pre-made equations too, but in my experience, most of the ones you'd want to use, it's faster to type them in than it is to actually find them. So we're going to go back up. I'm just going to click off there for a second, and instead of choosing the down part so that I can select a specific equation, I'm just going to click on the big button to insert equation. And from there, we can type in anything. I can type in any regular statement. It shows up just fine. But what we really want to use this for is, wait, that shouldn't be an exclamation, that should be a question. What we really want to use this for is determining or being able to put in equations. So I'm going to start off just by showing you some of the symbols that are available. Obviously, all the letters that you can type are already available. But if you look up here, there's a whole bunch of common ones, or at least some of them are common depending on what course you're using this for. By the way, I'm using this video for several different courses, so I'm going to kind of include ones that may or may not be in your course. Some of the symbols you might want to use are plus minus or minus plus. So for instance, if you have like x squared equals 4, x equals plus or minus 2, that's where you would use this one. Along with it, you might use the minus plus, which in many cases means the same thing, but in some it means that it's the opposite sign as whatever that one was. So for instance, if I had plus minus a equals minus plus b, it means that a is equal to negative b, or negative a is equal to positive b. Anyway, more detail than we need at the moment. You may use, well, equal sign you can just type in. Not equals is one that you might want to use. Multiplication, although in many cases we just use brackets to represent multiplication. Division, since it's really hard to find a division sign on the keyboard. Greater than, less than, greater to, greater than, less than. Okay, I'm losing track of what I'm saying here. The words have no meaning. Approximately equal to, etc. More likely the ones you're going to want to use are ones like, for instance, delta, which means a change of something. Fairly common in a lot of courses. This E, or thing that looks like an E, which is actually an element of a set, comes in handy in some courses. You may want to use the arrows for stuff. That one could be used in a few places. Over here we have several Greek letters that are used for different things. Most of them aren't too common. You might use this delta if you're in calculus. The theta is a fairly common one for anyone using angles, trigonometry, and pi is a pretty common one. So anyway, if you're looking for a special symbol, something that isn't on the keyboard but is in your mathematics, take a look there first. You'll probably find it. Okay, I'm actually going to leave a little bit of space here, just so that this isn't as messy. Lots of fun. Okay, now how to do something like a fraction. That's actually quite easy. Again, we're just going to insert equation and choose fraction. There's different ways of writing the fractions, like basically side by side or diagonal. Usually we're just going to use the over. And then we can use, or say for instance, use the area of a triangle is base times height over 2 would be a good example of that. Pretty easy to use. Now, something I do want to point out is that usually you want to put in the operation, so for instance, that division sign, before you start typing things in. I'm just going to show you over here. You can do it after the fact, but sometimes it depends on where you want something. So if I just say, for instance, I want to just make the fraction 1/2, I could type 1 and then say, okay, highlight the 1, make it a fraction, and it'll put it on the top. But in general, a better way to do that would be to just say, I want to make the fraction, I'm going to just put in the half or the fraction symbol first, and then it gives me these little dotted boxes, and I'll put a 1 in the top and a 2 in the bottom. You can try to use the cursors with these. You're more than welcome to. I find it a little faster to use the mouse, just because sometimes the cursor doesn't go where you think it's going to go once you get into fractions and weird things like that. Okay, exponents. Much the same idea. Insert equation and exponents. It's under script here. It looks like a letter E to the exponent x. And there's a few different variations you can use on it. The basic equation, or the basic exponent we're going to use, is just the first one. So that I could type in something like 2 to the exponent 5 equals 32. I can also use that same script part if I want to do subscripts. So for instance, if a population has doubled, I could do something like this. The population equals twice, and I want to write down the initial population. I'm going to use a subscript up here, and I'm going to say population initial. Initial, does that look right? It looks like too many I's, but my brain is a little scrambled right now. Better yet, and this is a common notation used in a lot of mathematics, instead of writing down the word, we often use a 0. And it's read as P naught, not being the British version of 0, not as in it's not there. The reason that's often used for an initial value is because we talk about, time 1, time 2, time 3. Well, the initial time would have been time 0, or T naught. This is P naught. By the way, if you're allergic to P naughts, do not use this notation. Okay, square roots. If we want to do the square root of 25, for instance, insert equation, radical, and then we can just use the basic square root symbol. You can use these fancier ones, or that fancy one at least if you'd like to, but we'll start off with this one. And you can write down, for instance, the square root of 25 equals 5. Although if you're good, you know that is true. I was going to say plus or minus, but that's only if this side initially was squared. This will only be positive. If you want a generic root, same idea, except choose the second one. Now, if you want specifically, I want radical. If you want the square root, you can have the little 2 up there. If you want the cube root, you could put a 3 up there. And if you want the any generic root, you can use that one. And up here we said 2 to the exponent 5 is 32, so I can say the 5th root of 32 must be 2. Basically an equivalent statement to what was above. Trig functions. We can put in any of the sine, cos, tan, and any of the special versions of that, the inverses, the cosecant, secant, and cotangents, etc. That's pretty easy to do, and since I like using proper angles, I'm going to put in a theta there. So that's how we would type that in. Or we put down, If I start typing now, I'm in the sign box. I want to go outside the sign box, and then I can type a function of theta equals sine theta. If you're not familiar with function notation, well, you probably should be familiar with function notation, but if you need to brush up on it, we're going to cover that later. Logarithms, very similar to exponents, but backwards. Insert equation under limits and logs. Limits you're probably not familiar with, but logs you may have seen before. So we can put in something there. And there's two parts here. There's the base, and then there's the actual input value. So by default, I'm trying to remember, I think it's here without the, I think you can get it without the place to put in the base. So yeah, you can use the second one here. We'll usually use the first one so we can plug in the base to make sure we can see it's there. But by default, logs are base 10. And if I do log base 10 of, say, 10,000, for those of you who don't know what a log is, it basically is a fancy way of saying, what exponent do I put on a 10 to get 10,000? And the answer would be 4. So this is just telling me that 10 to the exponent 4 is 10,000. But that's how to type in a log. Limits is really only going to be used in advanced functions in calculus, but it's a fairly common thing to use in those areas. So I'm just going to really quickly show you that you can insert a limit. If you're not familiar with the notation for limits, it's a little bit odd, but bear with me. You can do the limit as actually f at x plus h. You could literally stick anything in here. So actually, I'm going to do something a little bit simpler. I'm just going to do x squared. Oh, I should do that using the actual stuff I just showed you. There are some shortcuts there, but if you're not familiar with them, it actually often takes longer than to just do it this way. I've been doing this for a long time. I still do it this way for the most part. Okay, so I could do something like the limit as x, and I think I can use the symbol over here, this little arrow, x approaches 0. And a limit is basically just saying what happens to this as you approach a certain value for x. So obviously, as you get closer and closer to x equals 0, as x gets very, very small, approaches 0, x squared approaches 0. That's all a limit is. Becomes very useful in calculus and advanced functions when you're trying to do stuff. There's one more here. It's only for data management. I think it's only for data management, and that would be sigma notation. Should add that one in. It's pretty straightforward. Well, I shouldn't say straightforward. Straightforward if you understand equation editor and you know what you're looking for. That would be under large operators. So this is a symbol saying add up a whole bunch of things. And the notation, actually I'm going to use the, no, that's fine. This is basically saying where to start. So I'm just going to say n equals 1, 3, n squared. And if you don't know what sigma notation is, I can show it to you in about 10 seconds. It's saying take this value of n, start it at 1, and then keep going up until you hit this top number, and then add those all together. So n squared, when n is 1, that's really a fancy way of saying 1 squared. And then we add up the next one, which would be fill in 2, because after 1 comes 2. 2 squared. And then after that would come 3 squared. And once we hit the 3, we stop because it says start at 1, stop at 3. And then from there, we can evaluate that manually, and that's 1 plus 4 plus 9. And that should just equal 14. This is bad notation, but I should do this. Start new lines for everything. Okay, but anyway, that said, that's basically how these different things work in Equation Editor. I think I've covered literally anything that we're going to use in these courses in high school right here. So if you want to use Microsoft Word, it really is that easy. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There is another video on how to do this in Google Docs. It's similar, but not exactly the same. And you can use whichever one you prefer. I personally prefer the Microsoft Word version, but if you don't have access to it or you like Google Docs better, by all means use it. So that said, I will leave you there, and I'll see you in the next lesson.